Hey everyone, I hope everyone's doing well, and welcome back to another lesson. Before we start, let's imagine something real quick. You're at school, and your friend offers you a trade. They'll give you their cheap 30-cent pen for your expensive $1 pen. Would you take the trade? Well, unless you really wanted that 30-cent pen, you'd probably say no, because your $1 expensive pen is a lot more valuable and probably does a better job than their 30-cent pen. Coming back to chess players of all skill levels use the same idea, except instead of trading pens, we trade pieces. There's just one problem. We know that trading pens would be a bad idea because our pen is more valuable than their pen, since it's $1 against 30 cents. But that means we need to know how valuable each chess piece is. This is where the point system comes in. The point system is going to tell us how valuable each piece is, so that way you can tell if you're getting a good deal or losing out. Also, another thing before we start, I'm going to be using the term trade a lot in this video, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, a trade is when you capture one of your opponent's pieces and then let them capture one of your pieces in return. Some trades can also involve more than two pieces, like if you capture a piece, your opponent captures back, and you capture their piece again. Alright, so let's get into it. First off, each piece has a value that represents how powerful they are. At higher levels, the values of each piece can change depending on the situation, but for right now, here are the values. The pawn is worth 1 point, the knight is worth 3 points, the bishop is also worth 3 points, the rook is worth 5 points, the queen is worth 9 points, and the king doesn't have value because it can't be captured or traded. Using the value of each piece, we can do a little bit of addition and subtraction to figure out if trading certain pieces is worth it. Let's look at an example. You have a queen, and your opponent has 2 bishops. If you trade your queen for those 2 bishops, will it be a good trade? Think about that for a second, and then I'll show you the answer. Alright, so in this example, the trade is actually bad for you. The queen is worth 9 points, and each bishop is worth 3 points. 3 plus 3 equals 6, meaning you would lose 9 points of material and only gain 6, which is bad because we want to have a lot more points than our opponent. Remember, the value of each piece is based on its power, so if the value of all of your pieces put together is higher than the value of all of your opponent's pieces put together, that means your pieces are more powerful, which will help you win the game easier. Let's try another example. Let's say you capture a rook, knight, and pawn, and your opponent captures 2 bishops and 2 pawns. Take a moment and try to figure it out. To figure out how many points you captured, we add 5 for the rook, 3 for the knight, and 1 for the pawn. 5 plus 3 equals 8, and 8 plus 1 equals 9, so you gained 9 points of value. Now let's do our opponent. They captured 2 bishops and 2 pawns, so they would have gained 3 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1 points. 3 plus 3 equals 6, 6 plus 1 equals 7, and 7 plus 1 equals 8, so they gained 8 points of material. Since you gained 9 points of material and your opponent only gained 8 points, you are now 1 point of material ahead of your opponent. The base values of each piece are likely going to be enough for most players, but at higher levels, people stop using only the base values of each piece, because it's not as simple as a piece having a single value. Rather, each piece can have different values, depending on the position, your other pieces, your opponent's pieces, and even how much time is left in the game. I'm going to touch on a few common changes advanced players make when calculating points, but before I do, I just want to say that every player's opinion is a little different. Some people are really good at using their knights, so they value them over their bishops, even though they're both worth 3 points. This isn't wrong, it's just a little bit different. With that in mind, let's look at a few changes. The first change is to the bishop. When you only have one bishop, it can't leave the color square it starts on, which means your bishop's attacks are always restricted to one color. However, if you have both bishops, you can cover both the light and dark squares. For this reason, the bishops are worth 3 alone, but 3.5 each if you have both on the board. The next change is to the pawn. When your pawns are on the same file, those are the vertical columns on the board, they are collectively worth 1 3/4 instead of 2. This is because the pawn on the top can no longer be defended by the pawn on the bottom, and the pawn on the bottom is stuck until the pawn on the top leaves its square, making both pawns a little bit worse than their usual 1 point. The last change I want to touch on is also to the pawn. Because pawns promote once they reach the other end of the board, as your pawns get closer to the end of the board, they become more and more of a threat, and are therefore worth a little bit more. In this case, the change in value is very dependent on the other pieces and the position on the board. This means that unlike how the bishops increase in exactly half a point in value every time, there's no set increase to the value of the pawn as it travels down the board. However, if a pawn is one move away from promotion, it could potentially become a queen and be worth 9 points, so it might be worth it to trade it for your rook that's worth 5 points in order to prevent the promotion. Let's try a few more examples to make sure you really have things down. Some of the special changes might be in here, so pay attention to what's being captured. Ready? Let's go. You capture a knight with your rook. Your opponent captures back with a bishop. You capture their bishop with a pawn. They capture your pawn with a bishop. Who got the better deal? In this situation, you got the better deal. First, you captured a knight and bishop. That's 3 + 3 points, or 6 points. Our opponent captured a rook and a pawn, which is 5 + 1 points, or also 6 points. However, you captured one of their bishops, meaning they no longer have both bishops on the board. Remember the special rule. Bishops are worth 3.5 each if you have both of them on the board, but go back to only being worth 3 each if you only have one of them. This means that the value of the bishop they still have left on the board just went down, whereas the value of our bishops has remained higher at 3.5 each. Okay, that's going to be it for me today, but before I go, the point system is very important to memorize if you want to improve at chess. If you haven't already memorized them, the values of each piece are very important to know. So, to recap, the pawn is worth 1 point, the knight and bishop are both worth 3 points, the rook is worth 5 points, and the queen is worth 9 points. There isn't really a trick to memorizing the values of each piece, so you just have to get enough experience to where you can recite them from memory. But there's only 5 pieces to memorize since the king doesn't have a value, so it shouldn't be that difficult. But that's all for me today, and I'll see you in the next lesson.